I'm Sophia.
And this is
BLteatime, where we talk about all the good BL and tea that goes with it.
hmm and in today's episode, we will be covering omegaverse, the exciting side of the omegaverse.
All the good stuff that comes with Megaverse. So we're basically gonna give you guys I guess a lesson on what it is first before we really get into like any of the recommendations that we have.
hmm
Um, so an Omegaverse basically is like a fake universe. It's an
Yeah,
alternate universe. It's not something that is like real.
yeah. It's not based. It's like not based on reality. Like
Yeah.
it's like kind of, but like it's like added onto it.
Okay, so this in this alternative universe, basically everyone has a second gender, is what
hmm
it usually is. And you could either be an alpha, a beta, or an omega, which we'll get into everything like individually in just a second.
hmm
Um, and then in this universe, it also is where M Pride comes from, which is
Yeah,
men can get pregnant in these
yeah.
stories.
That's the big part of omegaverse is that men can get pregnant, so we start getting those cute, adorable babies.
Very adorable babies. All right. So first off, we're going to talk about alphas.
hmm
Now, alphas, they are the dominant people in this universe.
hmm
So they are seen as like these higher beings, like they are highly respected. There's a lot that goes into them. Uh
Yeah.
Also with them is every type of secondary gender, there's like a specific norm that goes with them, whether it's
Yeah.
like how they act, and then as well as like their body types. So alphas are usually like
Big.
big, muscular, depending on the story, they're usually big old assholes.
Yeah, like it's it's always like every other alpha is an asshole in the story except for the main one that we're talking about.
Mhm.
Cuz alphas can come off as honestly the best way to describe an alpha is kind of like a douche fraternity dude.
Yeah, just
Like just an asshole.
asshole, horny all the time, like, they
Mhm.
feel like their needs need to be met versus vice
Exactly.
versa, and like I said, it really depends on the story. Not all alphas are like this, it's just normally in the stories,
Yeah.
alphas are kind of like big assholes.
Cuz I've read some stories where they're just big old teddy bears.
Okay.
Nothing too bad about them.
Mhm.
So next in this universe is the beta, and betas are usually like more or less they're like the everyday average Joe.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite special about them. They can't smell pheromones, which we forgot to add. Alphas give off pheromones.
Oh, yeah.
Um, Betas usually can't smell pheromones. Depends on the story. I've read a story where the betas could, but they didn't like do anything about it.
Mhm.
Um, Yeah, they're just like every day, like me and you would be a beta, just living life, going through it, watching all the chaos between alphas and omegas.
Basically kinda like, "Oh, I
Yeah.
don't know the struggle." I think depending too on what story you're reading,
hmm
betas, um, they are still normally below alphas, but
hmm
they're either seen as, like, just normal, like, below alphas, but, like, above omega, it's just normal people, or sometimes
Yeah.
they're just kinda seen as, like, I would say useless because there's really nothing to them. Like, they can't like, it just depends on the story. In some stories, they can't get pregnant, they can't get people pregnant, so it's just
Yeah.
like
Some stories they're like it adds to the story, and sometimes I feel like they're just betas just to write off like other characters, like
mhm,
background characters. There's nothing really to a beta, so you can kind of go anywhere with that, character.
mhm,
hmm
right. And
And then we have.
omegas.
hmm
Okay, so omegas are usually they're, like, the bottom submissive of the story, with the whole how they're seen, they're below everyone else.
hmm
They aren't highly praised, which is I think it's kinda weird
It is kind of
considering the
weird.
fact that, like, they have, like, the same dynamics as an alpha, except they're seen as, like, what would you say, like, breeding
Uh,
material? Like, if you
yeah,
want
in
a kid,
some
you need them.
ways, some stories it does come off as Omegas are just used for breeding and then like nothing else even. But then other stories it's just like they uh interact just like everybody else. They just happen to have be an omega and they go into heat sometimes.
Mhm.
It really depends on the story again. I'd say back when when Omegaverse kind of started getting popularized, I guess, and more people started writing omegas, more people got creative in the ways that they wrote omegas
Yeah.
instead of just kind of uh having everyone treat them like human trash.
Yeah, because it used to be like, you don't want your kids to come out as an omega, even though it just never makes sense to me because they're needed to breed, so it's kinda like, why are you hoping that they're not omegas when you kind of need them to be omegas
And
sometimes?
then at the same time, some stories they write it as if, you know, it's like an equal amount of alphas, omegas, and betas. Like they're all like an equal amount. Like it's just like you could be any. And then some stories they write it where it's very, very rare to be an omega, and it's very even more rare to be a male omega.
Yeah.
So like it again, it just depends on the story.
Mhm. And then usually with omegas, they're built small, thin, weak as fuck.
Hmm.
Like, I feel like usually they're not very strong, but there is, like, definitely nowadays, there's more stories where omegas are built
Yeah,
like normal people and not like these frail little beings that
these little weaklings,
like, just like you blow on them a little
they
too
just gonna
hard,
fall over.
they're just gonna yeah, they're just gonna
They're just gonna fall over and just like yeah, the closest alpha.
yeah,
I
that's
hope he catches me.
someone help me.
Someone help me, please.
Yes. All right. So now we're gonna start getting into like the whole like relationships and how they work in Omega verses.
Hmm.
So I guess again, it's always gonna depend on the story. But usually
Yeah.
it's normally going to be an alpha needs to go with an omega because that's like the norm in these stories because
Hmm.
they kind of meet each other
Hmm.
essentially. Um yeah, it just depends on the story, and then in some of
Yeah.
them, they have something called a fated pair, which I
Hmm.
think is kind of cute sometimes, but
Sometimes.
it's like you meet someone and you instantly know, like, they're meant to be your
Yeah, like you have
pair.
this like connection of like one of the stories we're gonna talk about in a second. Like he like sees him, he's just like, "Oh, that's my fated pair. I felt it. That's it. That's the person."
Mhm. It's like,
And
"I need
then
to be with you."
yeah.
And then also with relationships, so normally, in normal stories, when they really like each other, they'll like get married or start living with each other. But in
Mhm.
Omega verses, it's if you really like someone and you want to be with them, you have to do this thing called bonding.
Mm.
So usually what bonding is, it's kind of like you get bit in the back of the neck by
Yeah.
it's the alpha's gonna bite the back of the omega's neck, essentially like marking them as theirs.
Mm.
And then the thing was with the bonding though, because this is like a huge deal, it's like bigger than marriage.
Yeah,
Th
because you can only and this is for most stories, you can only really be bit once.
Mhm. You can only bond with one person, and if you try to go off with other people, like, you'll in some stories, you'll get sick,
Mhm.
um, you could die essentially from not being with the person that you're bonded with because you're,
Mhm.
like, now essentially, like, one being.
Yeah.
So, like, if you're away, you'll get sick. If you try to, like, have a sexual relationship with someone else, you'll get sick. You physically just can't do it, and like I said, if you're away long enough, like, you could just potentially die.
Mhm. And then other stories, it's just like I was reading one recently where he got bit by somebody and then they just dipped, and then he was just kinda screwed, so he said he had surgery to get it taken out or
Mhm.
something, but it still left him he can never be marked again.
Mhm. Which is really
So
s it's like a sad concept because I feel like I can't remember if it was one that I read, like, a fan fiction for, or, like, if it actually was in a webtoon, where you can remove essentially the marking, but it's super, 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 super painful. Like, it's
mhm.
so painful to do that to someone. Um I'm pretty sure it was a fan fiction now that I fan fiction now that I think about it. But yeah, like if you bite it off, you can bite it off, but it's super painful. It's like you could
Yeah.
die from it, but like at the end of the day, you can get remarked. It's just like the pain that you'll experience for a couple days is gonna be like excruciating.
Oof. Big oofs.
Big oops. Yeah, I feel like I already see
Oh.
marriage as like a little bit of a big old step, but that is just
Exactly, like, you have to that's why I think, like, when I read the ones when they're fated pairs, I'm like, "Alright." I mean, like, y'all are fated to be together, but the other ones where they just like each other a lot, I'm like, "Oh gosh, I hope nothing bad happens because
yeah,
I don't know if I can handle that."
once they bond, it's kinda like you can't do anything wrong now, like, you it's so bad when you do, and that's why I feel bad for some of, like, the stories, like, where the Omega has been bonded, and then it's just it, like, essentially ruins the relationship that they could have
Mhm,
with their next potential partner, which is just super, super sad because it also gets to where it can be a little bit not a little bit, it can be very controlling towards the Omega.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah, because then they really can't leave.
mhm.
Because it mostly suffers for oh, yeah, I forgot about this. In some stories, like, the Omega can only be bit once, but the Alpha can bite as many times as he wants.
It's just the same concept of the whole, like, a male can get anyone pregnant. It's just
I think and that was something I was gonna bring up too. I feel like Omegaverse is so fascinating to at least women
mhm,
because it kind of brings like that woman aspect into it of just
mhm.
like you can kind of relate to this of like men just ruining your life.
Basically.
Yeah, I'm just like because I feel like that's why I kind of got into it where it's just like because at first I kind of read it and I was like I guess this is a new concept. I'll go along with it. But
Mhm.
like now I'm reading the stories, I'm just like, oh, I think I like these stories because I can not necessarily relate, but like understand.
Yeah, like, you can see where they're coming from, you can feel their pain of, like,
Yeah,
I'm only seen as, like, below this person because of my gender, you know?
exactly. Exactly.
Okay, and then when it comes to, like, the relationship as well, there's, like, a specific way that sexual activities persist.
Mm,
It's normally called mating in these stories. Uh, so basically, when you have an alpha and an omega, because like I said, that's the normal relationship in these stories. Um, like Grain had mentioned earlier, there's these things called pheromones, and both an omega and an alpha have pheromones. It just depending on the story, how it's like who can use it better basically depends on the story. Usually it's the alpha like with their pheromones, like
hmm.
they can control people, like they could tell Omegas, yo, sit down, and the Omega's just like,
All
okay.
right, let me just go pop a squat somewhere.
Yeah, because it's
Like it
controlling to them.
like the alpha has pheromones that the omega is attracted to, and the omega has pheromones that the alpha is attracted to.
Mhm.
So when one of them is released, like the other one could come crawling. And then when both of them are released, I think that's supposed to be the okay, but some of them don't be listening to that.
Yep. And it's so that's when things get a little hairy. But yeah, with like the pheromones, so there's both of them go through specific things. So like an alpha will go through a rut.
Hmm.
And then omega will go through a heat. And during these times is when like they feel like they need to be very sexually active. Like they just have
Hmm.
that urge to like essentially with an omega when they feel they get their heat, they essentially want to breed. And I think it's the same thing with an alpha's rut. It's like they need to breed. They feel the need to breed.
Yeah.
Like they want to
Gotta
have
find the nearest opposite of me and make some babies or something.
make some babies, and that's, like, probably one of the sadder things in the story too, it's just the fact that it's, essentially, it, like, controls them, it, like,
Hmm.
changes their mindset, like, you could have, like, an omega that's, like, headstrong, is like, "Man, screw alphas," and then as soon as their
And then the
heat hits
second their he hits or the right alpha with the pheromones pass, they're just like, oh damn it, my knees.
yeah, like, I
I'm
go,
going down.
"I'm going down, sir," and they just instantly are just they're like these, "Oh, I need an alpha in my life," like, I need them.
Hmm.
Um So that usually provokes a lot of, like, unwanted sexual
Yeah.
activity.
Yeah, I was gonna say big trigger warning to a lot of these stories, a lot more than I'd like to say.
Mhm.
I feel like again, when Omegaverse first started popping off, it was way more toxic.
Mhm.
But I feel like nowadays you read stories and they're just like either the act happens but there's consequences and we get like story after it. Like it's not just like, oh, this happens, whatever.
Mhm.
Or like we have like good alphas who aren't assholes and actually take care of their megas.
Mhm.
So when we go through our stories, no trigger warning. There are some stories that are a little bit the stories, you know, it depends on how you take it.
Yeah.
And we will say the triggers beforehand so
Mhm.
you can know if this is a story for you, if those kind of triggers or not, don't read the story. It's not
Yeah.
worth it.
It's not. Uh, so then let's see. So if the section, I guess, like, if the okay, let me get this back together. Whew. Okay, so while we're mating, if we do, let's say we do hypothetically want kids or not want kids, it really depends on the situation. Um, there's this thing that an alpha does usually that pretty much is like this is like how you know
Oh, yeah, this
that
threw me off the first
pregnancy's
time I saw it.
the pregnancy's coming is they not you or they not you. They not the omega. And
They're not you
yeah,
specifically. If they come through
yeah.
the story, come for you.
And basically what nodding is, it's like
The best way to put it is sadly, it's what dogs do. Like
yeah.
actual like dogs.
Mhm.
Like that's how you know like when you I don't know if anybody like breeds dogs. I had a dog like many years ago that we were trying to get her some puppies. And that's how you basically know. And it's pretty painful like in real life for the female dog.
Mhm.
And in the stories as well, it's pretty painful for the omega
Yeah. It's really painful, and then the fact is, like, they also have to stay in that same position
till it
for
stops.
till it stops, which can take, like, hours, forever. I don't know.
You're gonna have to
Um,
call your friend over, come bring you some snacks.
some snacks, maybe take care of your other child. Really depends. It's not but nodding isn't something that normally happens. It's, I would say it's only when the both of them are, like, really getting into it, and like I said, like,
Yeah.
if they're both in their, like, heat or rut and stuff like that, it's
Yeah.
normally when it happens.
You normally see it in a story that's gonna have a baby.
Mhm.
Because not all the stories you get a baby, but when you do get a baby, there's usually some nodding going on in there.
Which, like you said, it surprised me too the first time I saw it, I was like, "Oh my,"
I
like
actually had to Google it because I was like, what? Because I felt like I wasn't even reading the word right. I was like,
Mhm.
nodding?
Nodding
I
like
don't feel right.
like a
Like not?
knot?
Like what's going on in there? Like I had to Google it and then it told me like the thing with the dogs. And I was like, oh yeah, that is what dogs do. Oh, is that
Mhm.
what they mean? Okay, whatever. To each his own.
To each his own. So, yeah, that's with the whole mating thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then one last thing I wanna get into before we really start going into, like, the recommendations is who can date who?
Mm,
Or who do you normally see dating who? So, like I said before, alpha omega, that is the usual relationship in these stories. It is, I would say, I personally can say I've never read a story where an omega and an omega have gotten together or an alpha and an alpha has gotten together. I just personally
ooh,
have never read a story like that.
I've read an
Well,
alpha and an alpha.
I think one of my stories that has kind of alpha alpha, it's a little like on the it's a little bit on the it's reaching kind of, I would say, like, it's not necessarily about the 2 of them, just the 2 of them, um, but, yeah, I could say, like, that type of dynamic relationship is just it's n rarely gonna happen because at the end of the day, you still have those dynamics of an alpha and an omega need each other,
Hmm.
so it's kinda like if you need the other sex to kinda get through, which there is a way, I had just remembered this, there's a way for an omega and an alpha not to be so dependent on them, and is if they take
Yeah.
suppressants,
Oh yeah, medications.
medications to, like, regulate the heat or, like, make it less painful because it is, like, these things are very especially for an omega, heats are, like, super, super painful.
Yeah, like you
And it
can't go to work, you have to call out. You
Mhm.
can't go to school. You just got to kind of, unless you have a like a mate or someone to call on, you're just in your room going through it.
You're just going crazy essentially. Um, so it's like but it's just kinda like even with the stories that do have suppressants, it always ends up they need each other somehow,
Yeah,
some way.
the
So
love is more powerful than medication.
yeah, love prevails. Aw.
Oh,
But then we also have betas. And I've read a couple stories where a beta can be with an alpha or a beta could be with omega. That is it's still rare, but it's not as rare as like the other two. And
yeah,
if it's usually not like an omega and a beta or an alpha and a beta, it's can beta betas. It's like that's pretty normal. That's usually like the background couple. It's kind of like
yeah.
we're
Just two betas living life.
just kind of chilling. Um, and then I guess one thing it's like not only is the fact that like the relationship doesn't really work because they're so dependent on each other, it's also the fact of how like the people around you will see you. Um,
hmm
no one's gonna be very nice to the fact that if two alphas are dating, people are gonna be like, that's not possible, like that relationship's
Yeah, it's
not
like they
gonna
took
work.
it's like they took away the homophobia because like
Mhm,
they're like, oh, uh, boy, Omega, whatever, you can be with whoever. They don't care about the homophobia part. But if you see like an odd couple, that's like the part where people like be like against it, and you're just like, that's weird.
I'm like, why are you
There's already a lot going in this universe, and you mad that like blank and blank is together? Because
Mhm,
like sometimes you read them and I don't think I put this story on the list, but I have read a story where because omegas is so rare,
mhm.
people around it was like, uh, they took that as like then they were being homophobic because they were like, oh, you're gonna be with a boy omega, and it's like an omega's an omega.
Yeah.
Love is love. Let's
Love
not.
is love.
Let's not.
Exactly. So it's like betas in the story, it's like they can be in a relationship, it's just very tedious when it comes to it,
hmm
and then, like I said, it really depends on the story, what type of story that you wanna get going. If you can change up anything, like, some stories, maybe a beta can get pregnant or get someone pregnant.
Yeah, at this point, it's really up to the author and how they want their universe to work
Mhm,
because like we have a list of stories that we're going to go through. They are all written by different authors and they all kind of follow their own rules. When we talk about them, you'll see them.
hmm,
So like I said earlier, omegaverse at this point is just whatever you want. It's really just the fact that there's alphas, betas, and omegas. Like after that, your story is off to you.
mhm.
Like they write however they want to write.
It really depends, yeah, because it's like I've read so many different ones where just, like, nothing's ever the same, and I think that's what used to kind of make it hard to read it because the universes were never consistent,
hmm
and I was like, "Okay, so in this universe, we can do this, but in that universe, we can't do this," so it's kinda like you're reading it you go in reading a story thinking this is how things are gonna work, and then they don't
Yeah,
work
and I
out like
think
that.
I should have said this earlier. You also know you're about to read an omega. Do you ever, let me say the chart that's like in the
Yes.
like first few pages of the chapter.
Mhm,
It will like as most art authors, they will essentially put this to explain their universe.
mhm.
And some of them, if they have like similar universes, they just copy and paste. It's the same like diagram. I've seen it a few times.
Yeah.
Uh, but then like other art authors will put their diagram so that you can better understand how their universe works,
Yeah.
which is helpful.
It is,
I
it was
recommend
helpful when I
reading
first
them.
starting, yeah. 'Cause I wouldn't read them, and I remember when I first kinda, like, got into it, I was so confused. I was like, "What is the what are you talking about?" Like, they'd bring up,
Yeah.
like, the omega, alpha, and all this stuff, I'm like, "Huh?" Like,
Yeah, the first time I read
"What?"
it, I'm pretty sure I was confused too because I skipped the diagram because I thought it was just like author's notes or something.
Mhm,
Or just like honestly, they kinda look like publisher notes, like where this was published or something.
Mhm.
So that's why I was like, "Whatever," and just skip to the story, and, like, I was like, "What's going on here?" And then, like, going back and rereading or seeing a different story that was very similar, and I read the diagram at the top, and I was just like, "Oh, okay. Now I get where we're going." Because when you said alpha, I was like, "What?" Like, the
A
symbol?
he? What is a he? What are
What do
we?
you what do you mean he can get pregnant? Like, I'm
Yeah.
for it if it could happen, but I'm still confused.
Mhm. Because even, like, I know now that things keep progressing, there's so many different ways now where, like, men can get pregnant in the stories, like, sometimes they just have a uterus or whatever. I've read a couple of them like that. So now that we have been educated and we know what is going on in these stories.
We spread some knowledge.
Mm.
Oh, mind you, again, like I always say, if we're wrong about anything, just write it,
Mhm.
correct us, put in the comments.
Let us know because we're always learning. Because, like I said, some things change. I know there has to be like some origin to these stories.
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder what is the first like omegaverse? Like,
Mhm.
because I know there's like been like different kind of ways to kind of write impreg stories, but like what was the first like omegaverse?
Because I think they obviously take inspiration from like the whole animal things, like with the heat, the nodding, and all that stuff. Like they take it
Mm-hmm.
from there, and then they just added like their own twist to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know the oldest one that I can think of that I've read was Animal X.
Never heard
I
of that one.
It's so old. It the story's kind of weird. I've never actually like read it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where it's like the main couple did end up having a child, and I was like, "Ooh." So I think that's where I
Interesting.
stumbled upon it was
Yeah.
from Animal X, but the story to me anyways is very confusing.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really like it that much, and like I said, it's really old, so it has all that old trope in it that some
Mm-hmm.
people just don't like. I'm one of those people.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then it
I
also
agree.
was just drawn in, like, 90s yaoi, so all the men had small heads, big bodies, and long hair.
Long fingers.
Long fingers.
Yeah, I can't remember the first one I read. I remember going through the confusion, but I can't remember what that story was. Um, but then I just remember I kept seeing like smaller stories of
Mhm,
it, and I was just like, "Oh, okay." And like some of the ones I'm about to bring up when we start going over them were
mhm.
like stories where I was just like, "Oh, so this is what this is. Okay, oh, we in Omegaverse. All right."
Finally, I'm educated.
Finally, she educated.
Mhm. I'm so glad to finally get educated. Because if I were trying to read the stories that I read now without that knowledge, I would be so confused. It'd be
Oh
like.
yeah, if I got into like BL now, I feel like that would have threw me through a loop because there's so many stories now,
Mhm.
and they're just like tossed in with like everywhere. Like they're in every category. So I would just be like, okay, some of these stories they can't get pregnant, and some of them they can, and I'm confused. What's an
I'm
alpha?
confusioned.
What's a pheromone?
What
Is
is
it
these?
perfume? Don't put the perfume on.
All
Quenched.
right. I think it is time to finally start talking about stories that we want to recommend because there's a lot. We have
Yeah,
an
we do have.
extensive list.
We love recommending stories to y'all.
I want you all to read it. Some of these I feel like a lot of people have read, and then
Yeah.
some of them I'm like, how have you not read it? Like, are you like how?
Yeah, luckily today, a lot of the stories we have, we've both read.
Mm-hmm.
So we will both be having conversations about it.
Yes.
Mhm.
All right. So the first one we're gonna start off with is the most popular one. Currently, it's still ongoing. It's called Love Is an Illusion. And I feel like we brought Love Is an Illusion up before just to talk about Buell, the main character,
Buell.
Buell.
Buell is that and that BL universe out of the BL universe, that is that baby. Everybody loves that baby.
He is the nation's baby. Buell is the nation's baby. He is the cutest, like, he is not the main character, but he is the main character. Like
Yeah, it's like we've only really been in like half the story, if that. But
mhm.
when he's there, your heart just flutters.
It flutters because 'cause we've seen the man grow. He is now a walking child that
Oh,
can
he's walking out.
speak.
He can speak.
So, basically, Love is an Illusion my
You got
goodness.
this.
Love is an Illusion is about, this Omega named Haesung who didn't know he was an Omega, and that's, a trope that is used quite a bit in these stories,
Hmm.
uh, but he didn't know he was an Omega, but not only did he not know he wasn't an Omega, he thought he was an Alpha, but it was kinda like
But in like what universe would he be in Alpha?
he is the one when we were talking about the, omegaverse or not omegaverse, when we were talking about, like, omegas and alphas and how they're built different, I think this story is the best one to visually see what I mean when I say that they're all built different, because he
Hmm.
is, like, the definition of what an omega is. He's small, he's frail, but he's also a little asshole.
And that's where he thought he was an alpha. He had the asshole.
He had the
He had
ass
the asshole. He had the asshole characteristic. He was like, "Oh, I must be an alpha.
Mhm.
I'm awful."
Yeah, but since he, in Omega Verses, when there are some stories where you don't know that you're an alpha and omega because you don't present.
Hmm.
So he just hadn't presented, and with presenting, that means he basically didn't hasn't gotten any heat to show
Hmm.
him that he is an omega. So of course, with this trope, he only finds out because he goes into heat while he's at work, I believe, and all these alphas are trying to like scavenge him like a fucking running piece of
Get
meat.
him!
And then we have the second main character, Dojin, who is the alpha of the story. Now, with Dojin, another thing that's different with him and the story is that he never really had like a need for an omega. Like he had
Yeah.
no
He was very
desire.
nonchalant about the whole thing. He was like, I could be alpha, beta. I really don't care. Like
Mhm.
he was more into his career and his business. He really didn't want a relationship at all.
Mhm. But the thing is, this is where like the whole like fated pairs kind of comes in, where like he saw They s not so much Haesung, but Dojin when Dojin saw Haesung, he almost instantly felt, like, a connection, like, "This is my person."
Hmm.
But Dojin's never been in a relationship, so he's really bad about showing how he likes
Yeah.
Haesung, and it gets them into some tomfoolery, more on Dojin's end. Dojin, not very likable in the beginning, I would
Yeah.
say. Uh,
Honestly, both characters they take a second to grow on you.
they both have their qualities because
Who knows?
They just weren't good
Because
people.
reading back now, you like them because they give you Buell later.
Yes, that was their only purpose. Because I feel like if they didn't have Buell, because I went in knowing that when I had started reading it at the time, Haesung had just found out they were pregnant.
Hmm.
So, there was no Buell. There was nothing really holding me back, like or, like, really telling me to stay. I was just curious as how they were gonna go about the whole children and the stories, because normally with Omega Verses is once they have the child, the story is over.
Yeah, it is.
And the reason
I sometimes I'm just like, just keep it going. I want to see that baby.
you wanna see more, but they really just as soon as they have the kid, they're just like, the story's over." But this one, it was like the story was just beginning because Haesung and Dojin weren't bonded, they were not a pair,
Mm-mm.
it just they just so happened to conceive Buell, and it leads to this whole, like, them trying to build a
Girl.
relationship. Dojin instantly, like, he just starts getting all daddied up, he's like, "I'm a father
Yeah.
now," like
Like he instantly is just like he instantly gets the what is the word? Like parent intuition. He's just like, all right, it's time to be dad.
It's time to be dad. He grows up, he starts maturing
Yeah.
a lot.
He takes his career more seriously so he can, take care of his family.
Mhm.
He's ready to get married. He went and bought the ring and everything. Like he's ready to like
He's ready to settle down because to
Yeah.
him, not only is it the fact that he's about to have a child, but he's also with someone that he from the beginning since they met, he already felt different about this person because he's never felt
Yeah.
like this towards anyone before, which is sweet. But then you have Haesung, and this is where, like, a lot of people don't really like Haesung because he essentially just starts to use Dojin for money. Dojin
But you get some of the funniest scenes because of
oh,
that.
it's so
The
funny.
comedy out of that, hilarious.
Hilarious. Everything else, kinda sad because Haesung doesn't want this kid. He just found out he was an Omega, and now he
Like
is
pregnant instantly,
pregnant
having to deal
instantly.
with and I don't know how you feel about this, but he didn't want to keep the baby,
Mhm,
but he signed a contract saying he would give birth to the baby, but he didn't have to do a thing with the baby. Like he didn't have to be in a child's life, which
mhm.
is respect to you. Even though this isn't real life, your body, your choice. Okay.
Exactly, and Dojin made sure to make it worth his while. It wasn't like Dojin's like, "You have to have the baby," and, like, kinda left Haesung to rot. Like, he genuinely pampered Haesung. He gave him everything he wanted. He gave him all the money in the world just
Hmm.
so Haesung can have Yule. And Haesung, he the more you read, the more you understand why Haesung acts the way he does. He did not have a good childhood. He doesn't have good visions of alphas. He doesn't have
Hmm.
good visions of what marriage is like. He is super, super like he's just I would say like someone that's very lost. And then it
Yeah.
also doesn't help that Dojin has this friend named Hisu who doesn't like Haesung because Hisu's like, how could you treat my he calls him master because Haesung or not Haesung, but Hisu's family works for Dojin's family.
Yeah. He kind of grew up as like kind
His
of not.
lackey.
I don't want to say butler, but like
Yeah,
kind of.
lackey, just his sidekick, I guess, like, hey,
Yeah.
watch over him. And Hisu's a beta. So he's already like, how dare you treat my master this way? He hates Haesung so much so that when Haesung finally does give birth to Buell, and this should be like a very moment, like the baby's born, everyone's fine. Um, Haesung almost instantly gets the wrong idea about Dojin,
Hmm.
about what's gonna actually happen to Buell and him, and he gets scared and he tries to leave the country and like, and I mean, like buying a plane
Did
ticket to leave.
when he going to China or something?
Yeah,
Like
and
he was about to dip.
for a hot minute, you're like, where did he go? Hisu had him stowed away in his storage closet.
Yeah.
Just it was the worst. I think this is like the roughest part of the story between the two
Yeah.
because they also didn't know Dojin and Haesung didn't know they were actually bonded. So
They started
they're
getting sick and
mhm,
like feeling awful because they weren't with their pair.
mhm, which is really sad. And then Dojin's also dealing with the fact that he is now a single father. He's really
Which
going
I
through.
feel like some people complain about, like, oh, he left the baby. He signed the contract. That's what he was going to do anyway. He just
Mhm,
have, if it wasn't for the Hey Song stuff, he still signed the contract. That was his intention on leaving in the first place.
mhm.
Yeah, if he saw the baby, he could have felt like an emotional attachment to it, but he did sign the contract. He was like, I'm gonna give you this baby, and I'm gonna take my money, and I'm gonna dip.
Yeah, and
Like,
like
why are
that
people mad? He signed the paper.
it's like they knew they knew what the heck was gonna go on between the 2 of them, like, this shouldn't have been a shock. It only just comes down to the fact, though, that Haesung did eventually meet Buell and almost instantly was like, "This is my child," but he also Haesung struggles so much in the story, that's why when you look at him now, I appreciate his character development so much because
Yeah,
he really he went through it again and again and again, like,
we
even
got
when
we I will say I won't spoil this part, but you get some good side character story.
Mhm.
Like this is some side character stuff you stay for. You read that, you're just like,
Yes.
yes.
It doesn't just end with both, Dojin and Haesung. There's more to it. I'm just so glad that Haesung really, like, he didn't have to, but he stepped up, became a
Hmm.
mom. He tried to better himself, like, he hadn't finished high school because of, like, his past and stuff, so he finished high school, he's going to college. He really grew as a character, and that's
Yeah,
why I hate the whole Haesung slander with the whole because of how he acted in the beginning, because if that were the case, we should be hating on Dojin because he was a complete scrub from the beginning. Like he was terrible in the beginning. And you just don't realize it because he kind of character developed really early on in the
Yeah.
story because of, like, Buell and stuff like that. You
Mhm.
just This the same thing, Haesung, like, what did like, it's just you really have to think about it. What issues did Dojin have? He had
He
a
was filthy
rich
rich.
family.
He had a successful career. He an alpha, which is like top dog in this universe. Beautiful, attractive. What was your problems?
What was your issues? I can understand why he just couldn't understand Haesung because Haesung also didn't wanna talk about himself because he doesn't know Dojin, he doesn't they they just didn't know each other.
I also feel like some of the Haesung hate comes from like kind of like real life. Is like just because you're pregnant doesn't mean you have a like maternal connection to the baby.
Mhm,
And I feel like that was kind of like art imitating life in some aspect of like some people like don't really have that connection till the baby arrives. Some people, even when the baby arrives, they just never have that kind of connection.
mhm,
So like I kind of like applaud that side of the story for like talking about something that's not often talked about. It's just like what like mothers usually, but in a story, you know, omegas go through after pregnancy. Like this one talks of you kind of get some of that like what is it post
post
after you have the baby where you get depressed,
yeah,
like just depressed. Like we hit a little bit of that. I was like, okay, we're talking about some
mhm.
different stuff here.
Yeah, because Haesung is just like Haesung didn't just come back and he instantly, which is like this is like one of those trope like sometimes where like the omegas are instantly just like good mothers and they know what they're doing. Haesung
Yeah,
wasn't like that. Haesung
he's
had
still not like that. He's still learning.
he's still learning, but he's grown so much as a character.
Hmm.
And then we also have in the story the two different relationships between a beta. We have a beta and an oh wait, no, it's just no, that's her. Wait a minute. Yes, a beta with an alpha and then a beta with an omega. I had to
Yeah.
think about it for a second. I was like,
Some may right.
wait a minute. Also in the story, they also have things like an recessive omega and
Dominant.
a dominant omega. So with this universe as well, and it's the same thing with alphas too. If you're a recessive alpha or an omega, you're automatically below any dominant alpha and omega, which
Hmm.
it's not really that big into the story. Like it's not.
I feel like it's bigger in other stories.
Mhm. Here it's just like kind of well, like yeah, we'll sometimes mention it, but it's not that big of a deal. So, but there is like those that different relationship for sure. I know with like Hisu and Dojin, not Dojin, but Dojun. I hate the names. I hate the sibling
Everybody's name
names.
sounds so similar. I just feel like you gotta have to show me what they look like. Tell me
The
which one you're talking about.
hmm?
No, I'm just saying in general,
Yeah,
their names are always so similar.
the only two that don't have it is Chowan and Kyungsu, and it's just like, so why did they get well, I guess they're just not a part of the family. I don't know.
None of my
um,
business.
but those are the side couples in the story. I don't really want to get too much into it just because they are the side couple
Yeah,
and
and that's where it's currently at. So, like, if
mhm,
you want to read this one, I'd recommend reading it.
highly recommend it. All
Even though we
right.
kind of dragged it for a little bit, still highly recommend it.
There's, there with these stories, there's like ups and downs with it. Like not every Omega. I don't think I've ever read an Omegaverse story that is perfect. There's
Yeah,
always something going on in it.
and it also depends on what kind of plot you like. I love plot heavy, like when you watch like some telenovela kind of plot where you're just like, this is happening, they're going over here, yada yada yada. Like I love some good plot. So
Mhm.
if you like plot heavy, I would say this is a good one.
Yeah, and it's fairly long. It's come back twice from like the main story ending to the side story, and then there's like another side story.
And
Um,
then I think we're gonna get back to the main story, but I
Very
hope we get
excited.
back to the other side story because I have questions.
I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of thoughts that need to be answered. All right.
Hey you guys, editing rain here. So because we talked so much about Omegaverse, and I don't want this video to be almost 2 hours long, we decided to make it a part one, part two kind of situation. So we're gonna put part one up this week, and this is this video, and then part two will probably go up Next week, it won't be next week's video, but we will put it up so y'all can see it and see all of our recommendations we were talking about this week. Yeah, but because we made this decision after we filmed, there's no proper outro to the video. So I just came here to say follow all of our social medias, which is in the description below at BLteatime, and follow our Patreon, which is also at BLteatime. And sorry for the inconvenience, but we're trying. Yeah, so have a great week, you guys. Thanks for watching, and bye.